Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. We're tackling a big one today. Is there a link between creativity and mental illness?
Oh, yeah, the age-old question.
Yeah,
Do you need a touch of madness to create groundbreaking art or make revolutionary discoveries?
it's a question that's definitely been romanticized over the years, right?
Hmm.
We picture the tortured artist, the eccentric inventor, fueled by all their inner turmoil.
Right, right.
But is there any truth to this idea?
Or is it just a myth?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today with Margaret Boden's book, The Creative Mind, Myths and Mechanisms.
Oh, interesting.
And one of the first things Boden throws at us is this story of Ignaz Semmelweis.
I'm not familiar.
You know, the doctor who figured out that hand washing could prevent infections.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. Tragic example of a brilliant mind facing resistance.
Exactly. Semmelweis's ideas were so radical for his time that he was completely ostracized by the medical community
Oh, wow.
and eventually ended up in an asylum. Yeah. It just makes you wonder about the price of creativity and if challenging the status quo can sometimes be, well, a little dangerous.
For sure. It's a stark reminder that groundbreaking ideas are not always welcomed with open arms.
Absolutely.
But Boden's book goes beyond those anecdotal examples. She really delves into the cognitive processes behind creativity.
Right. And she doesn't shy away from those romanticized notions we were just talking about.
No,
She argues against seeing creativity as this purely inspirational or mystical thing. Instead, she really emphasizes the role of conscious thought processes,
that is thought.
even in those seemingly sudden aha moments.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So she's saying those aha moments aren't just like magic.
Yeah, they're rooted in something more concrete.
Right, like a process of exploration and transformation within what she calls conceptual spaces.
Conceptual spaces.
Yeah, so picture these spaces as vast landscapes of knowledge and ideas.
Okay.
A creative person navigates these spaces using their existing knowledge as a starting point.
Like an explorer charting new territory.
Exactly, and they're pushing boundaries, making new connections, and sometimes even creating entirely new landmarks.
I like that analogy. It makes it much easier to grasp. But how do we actually navigate these spaces?
Well, she introduces this concept of heuristics,
Heuristics.
which are essentially mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that help us make decisions and solve problems within those conceptual spaces.
Okay, I think I need an example here.
Yeah,
What does a heuristic look like in practice?
sure. So take music theory, for example. It provides a set of rules for how notes and chords relate to each other.
Right.
It's like a map for composing music,
So a composer could use those rules as a starting point,
a framework.
but then they could choose to bend or break those rules to create something new and interesting.
Exactly. They're discovering new possibilities within those conceptual spaces.
But wouldn't too much freedom be overwhelming?
Wow, that's a good point.
Like if you're exploring a vast, uncharted territory, wouldn't it be helpful to have some constraints,
Constraints.
some guidelines to help you navigate?
That's one of Boden's most compelling arguments. She actually suggests that constraints are essential for creativity.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I would think more freedom would equal more creative possibilities.
Think about it this way. If you have unlimited freedom, you're essentially adrift in an endless void. It's hard to find direction or purpose.
Okay.
But when you introduce constraints, you create boundaries, a structure to work within.
Like having a canvas to paint on instead of just an endless expanse of empty space.
Exactly. Constraints can actually focus our attention and force us to be more resourceful and inventive.
Okay.
She uses a great example in the book.
Yeah.
There's a game where children are given beads and string to make necklaces,
Okay.
but with specific rules about how they can be combined.
So the limited choices actually push them to be more creative with their designs.
Exactly. And this isn't just child's play. Think about sonnets in poetry.
Right.
The strict structure, the rhyme scheme, those limitations force the poet to find creative ways to express themselves.
Or like the rules of harmony and counterpoint in classical music.
Right.
Those limitations didn't stop Bach from composing masterpieces.
It seems paradoxical,
It does.
but sometimes having fewer choices forces us to dig deeper, to explore those conceptual spaces more thoroughly,
Interesting.
to find innovative solutions.
This is making me think about how I approach my own creative projects.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to set some more limitations for myself. Create some boundaries to pull against.
It's worth experimenting with.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, Boden tackles another big question in the book.
Okay.
Can computers be creative?
Ah, yes, the age of artificial intelligence. Are we talking about robot artists and composer bots taking over the world?
Well, not quite. But Boden does present some fascinating examples of AI programs that can generate novel outputs.
Like what? Give me some
Well,
examples.
she talks about Aaron. It's
Right.
a program created by Harold Cohen that can draw.
Okay.
And its drawings have actually been exhibited in art galleries.
Wait, seriously? A computer program making art that's good enough to hang in a gallery?
Yes. And it's not just visual art. She also discusses a program that can improvise jazz music in real time.
Okay, now that's really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But are these programs truly being creative? Or are they just following a very complex set of instructions?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one that Boden grapples with throughout the book. She argues that to understand computer creativity, we need to look beyond the output at the processes involved.
So it's not just about whether the computer can create something new or interesting. It's about how it arrives at that novelty.
Exactly. Is it exploring and transforming its own conceptual space?
Hmm.
Is it able to learn from its mistakes and come up with new strategies? Or is it simply executing a pre-programmed set of instructions?
Even if those instructions are incredibly complex.
Right.
That's a really nuanced distinction. And I'm guessing it's not always easy to determine?
No, it's a blurry line. And Boden doesn't offer easy answers. She presents these examples as a way to challenge our assumptions about creativity and to make us think more deeply about what it means to be truly original.
This is getting really deep, and I love it. But before we dive even further into the digital realm,
Yeah.
there's another aspect of Boden's book I want to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
She talks about the role of chance serendipity and even those seemingly random aha moments in creativity.
Sounds like she's challenging the idea that creativity is purely a product of conscious effort and deliberation.
Exactly. She argues that chance encounters unexpected events, even accidents, can play a crucial role in sparking new ideas
Interesting.
and leading to breakthroughs.
Like Fleming's discovery of penicillin.
Exactly.
He left a petri dish out. Mold grew on it, and boom, a revolutionary new medicine.
Right. But Boden is careful to point out that these chance occurrences don't always lead to breakthroughs.
Right. It takes a prepared mind,
Yes.
someone with the expertise and the insight to recognize the significance of those accidental discoveries.
It's not just about stumbling upon something new.
Right.
It's about having the knowledge and the ability to understand its potential.
For sure.
So luck might play a role, but it's the combination of chance and expertise that really drives innovation.
Okay, I'm with you.
But what about those aha moments? Those flashes of insight that seem to come out of nowhere? Are those purely random, or is there something more going on beneath the surface?
That's where things get really fascinating. Boden dives into the world of neuroscience and explores how connectionist models of the brain can help us understand those seemingly magical moments of inspiration.
Connectionist models. I'm going to need a little help understanding this one.
Sure. Imagine the brain as this vast network of interconnected nodes,
Okay.
like neurons firing and communicating with each other.
Okay. I'm picturing a complex web of connections constantly buzzing with activity.
Exactly. And these models suggest that our brains are constantly processing information, making connections, and generating associations even below the level of conscious awareness.
So those aha moments might actually be the result of a lot of unconscious mental work that we're not even aware of.
Precisely. It's not just about sitting around waiting for inspiration to strike. It's about creating the conditions for those insights to emerge by actively engaging with the material, exploring different possibilities, and allowing our brains to do their magic behind the scenes.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about inspiration or genius. It's about the interplay of conscious effort, unconscious processing environmental factors, and even a little bit of luck.
And that's where Boden's book really shines. It challenges those simplistic notions of creativity and offers a much more nuanced and grounded understanding of the creative process.
This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation so far.
Me too.
But there's one question that keeps nagging at me.
Okay, what's that?
What about those truly exceptional creators, those Mozarts and Einsteins, who seem to operate on a whole other level? Were they just born with a special kind of genius, or is there something more to it?
That's a great question, and one that Boden tackles head-on in the next part of the book. Stay tuned, because we're going to unpack the myth of genius and explore whether extraordinary creativity is really so different from the everyday kind.
Awesome. I can't wait to dive into that.
Me neither. All right, so let's tackle this idea of the exceptional creator. You know, we left off talking about Mozart, right? The child prodigy who just seemed to churn out masterpieces. Was he just touched by the divine, or is there a more, grounded explanation?
Well, you're expecting Boden to declare Mozart like a mystical unicorn, you're in for a surprise. She's
Sure.
all about debunking those romanticized myths. She really emphasizes the role of learned expertise, dedicated practice, and you guessed it, those all-important constraints we talked about earlier.
Okay, so she's not denying Mozart's talent, but she's saying it wasn't just raw ability that made him a genius, right?
Exactly. Mozart wasn't just doodling on a piano. He was completely immersed in a world of music, basically from day one.
Right, his father was a composer.
Exactly. So little Wolfgang was surrounded by music, constantly learning and practicing. It was like growing up in a language immersion program, but for music.
So in a way, Mozart had this highly specialized conceptual space built for him from childhood.
Right.
No wonder he was able to navigate it so brilliantly. But Boden also points out that Mozart's father wasn't just a passive bystander. He was actively involved in shaping his son's musical development.
Yeah, and this is where Boden emphasizes the role of motivation. Mozart wasn't just passively absorbing information, he was actively engaging with it, driven by this deep passion for music, and let's be honest, probably a bit of parental pressure too.
It's that combination of natural talent, nurturing environment, and just intense drive that seems to be the recipe for extraordinary achievement, not just in music, but in any field.
It reminds me of those elite athletes who dedicate their lives to their sport training for hours every day, pushing their bodies to the limit.
Yeah.
That level of dedication and focus doesn't just happen by accident. It's fueled by this deep-seated motivation, a burning desire to excel.
And that brings us back to those unconscious processes we were discussing earlier. Boden acknowledges that they play a role, but she challenges that romanticized view of the unconscious as this mystical source of inspiration.
So no more channeling the muse from the depths of our subconscious.
Well, not quite. But Boden argues that even those seemingly magical moments of insight can be explained, at least in part, by the way our brains are wired.
You're talking about those connectionist models again, right? The idea that our brains are constantly making connections and associations below the level of conscious awareness.
Exactly. It's like having this team of brilliant researchers working behind the scenes, constantly sifting through data-making connections and generating new hypotheses.
So when we have that aha moment, it's not just a random flash of brilliance. It's the combination of a lot of unseen mental work.
It's a more nuanced and, dare I say, more empowering view of creativity. It suggests that those flashes of brilliance aren't just reserved for a select few. They're a product of the way our brains work, and we can all tap into that potential.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It makes creativity seem more accessible, less like something that's bestowed upon us by the gods, and more like something we can actively cultivate. But let's not forget about those chance encounters and lucky breaks that Boden talked about. Do those play a role in the lives of these exceptional creators as well?
Absolutely. Boden dedicates a whole chapter to the role of chance, chaos, and unpredictability in creativity. She argues that even the most brilliant minds can benefit from a bit of serendipity.
So even Mozart might have stumbled upon a melody or a chord progression purely by chance.
It's certainly possible, Boden points out, that there are different types of randomness, from truly random events like Fleming's penicillin discovery to those that arise from complex, chaotic systems, which might even include our own brains.
Wait, you saying our brains might be governed by chaos? That's a mind-boggling thought.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? And it challenges the traditional view of science as this quest for order and predictability. Maybe there's a role for a little bit of chaos, a bit of the unknown in both science and art.
I love how Boden is constantly pushing us to question our assumptions. It's so refreshing. But this whole discussion about chance and chaos raises a big question for me. How do we reconcile these unpredictable elements with the scientific desire for explanation and prediction?
That's a question that scientists and philosophers have been grappling with for centuries, and Boden doesn't pretend to have all the answers. But she does suggest that science doesn't always have to be about predicting the future. It can also be about understanding the possibilities, exploring the potential for new discoveries and insights that might emerge from those unpredictable elements.
So it's about embracing the unknown, the unexpected, and allowing ourselves to be surprised by what we find.
Exactly. And that, I think, is at the heart of creativity. It's about pushing beyond the boundaries of what we know, exploring those uncharted territories, and being open to new possibilities.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about inspiration or genius or even hard work. It's about the interplay of all these factors, the conscious and the unconscious, the predictable and the unpredictable, the order and the chaos.
And those mental maps and heuristics we talked about earlier are still crucial for navigating this complex landscape. They provide a framework for exploration, but they also need to be flexible, adaptable, and open to revision.
Right. It's like having a map of a new city. It can help you get your bearings, but you also need to be willing to explore those side streets and alleyways to go off the beaten path and discover those hidden gems.
Exactly. And sometimes those unexpected detours lead to the most incredible discoveries.
This is making me think about those times when I get stuck in a creative rut, clinging to a familiar way of doing things, even when it's clearly not working.
We all get stuck sometimes. It's part of the process. But Boden's book reminds us that we have the power to break free from those limitations, to challenge our assumptions, and to explore new possibilities. It's about being willing to step back, reevaluate our mental maps, and maybe even redraw them entirely.
So it's not just about having those aha moments, but also about being able to critically examine our own thinking and be open to new perspectives.
Precisely. And that's where Boden's discussion of computer creativity comes full circle. She uses those examples, those programs that can draw improvised jazz and even make scientific discoveries to challenge our own notions of what it means to be creative.
So even those highly sophisticated programs, as impressive as they are, might still be missing something essential, that spark of awareness and intentionality that we associate with human creativity.
That's the big question, isn't it? And Boden doesn't offer any easy answers. She leaves us with more questions than answers, which, in a way, is the perfect way to end a book about creativity.
It definitely encourages you to keep thinking, to keep exploring those big, messy questions about the nature of creativity in the human mind.
Speaking of getting lost, Boden talks about how creative exploration can sometimes lead to unexpected, even unsettling discoveries.
Right. She brings up the concept of transformational creativity, where you're not just exploring the boundaries of a conceptual space, you're completely shattering them and creating something radically new.
That kind of creative leap can be incredibly exciting, but it can also be disruptive, even dangerous.
It makes me think about those artists and thinkers who were rejected in their own time because their ideas were too radical, too challenging to the status quo, like Galileo being condemned for his heliocentric view of the solar system, or Van Gogh struggling to sell his paintings during his lifetime.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that creativity isn't always pretty or comfortable. It can be messy, chaotic, even painful at times. And sometimes those who dare to challenge the established order pay a heavy price for their originality.
Boden even brings up the tragic story of Ignaz Semmelweis, again, the doctor who figured out that hand washing can prevent puerperal fever. A perfect example of someone whose creative thinking led to ostracism and ultimately a tragic end.
It's a sobering thought, but it also highlights the importance of intellectual courage, of being willing to stand up for your ideas even when they're unpopular or controversial. It's about trusting your own creative instincts even when the world seems to be telling you you're wrong.
And that's a core theme that runs throughout Boden's book. She's challenging us to think critically about those romanticized notions of genius and to recognize that creativity is something that we can all cultivate, even if it doesn't always lead to fame and fortune.
So it's not about being a tortured genius. It's about being curious, persistent, and willing to embrace those unexpected twists and turns that the creative process throws our way.
Exactly. And that's where her discussion of chance and chaos comes back into play. Those random sparks of inspiration, those serendipitous encounters that can lead us down unexpected paths.
She argues that those unpredictable elements are essential for true creativity. They help us break free from those rigid patterns of thinking and open ourselves to new possibilities.
It's about embracing the unknown, the unexpected, and allowing ourselves to be surprised by what we discover.
But it's not just about passively waiting for inspiration to strike. We need to be actively engaged in the process, constantly exploring, experimenting, and pushing those boundaries.
And that's where Boden's concept of heuristics comes back, in those mental shortcuts that help us navigate those complex conceptual spaces.
Exactly. But we also need to be aware of the limitations of those heuristics, to recognize when they're no longer serving us and be willing to modify or abandon them. It's about being flexible, adaptable, and constantly refining our mental maps as we explore new territories.
And that brings us back to Mozart. Boden argues that his genius wasn't just about innate talent. It was also about his incredible ability to manipulate and transform those musical structures, to play with those heuristics and bend them to his will.
So he was a master of those rules, but he was also able to transcend them, to break free from those conventions and create something entirely new.
Exactly. And that's the mark of true creative mastery. It's not just about following the rules. It's about knowing when to break them, when to push those boundaries and create something truly original.
It's about having the courage to be different, to challenge the status quo, and to express your own unique vision.
And sometimes that courage comes at a price, as we saw with Semmelweis. The price of rejection, isolation, even ridicule. But it's a price that some are willing to pay in pursuit of their creative vision.
It's a powerful reminder that creativity isn't always easy or glamorous. It can be a messy, challenging, even heartbreaking process.
But it's also a process that can lead to incredible breakthroughs, to moments of profound insight and beauty that enrich our lives and expand our understanding of the world. And that's ultimately what Boden's book is all about. It's about celebrating the human capacity for creativity, even in its most flawed and messy forms.
It's about recognizing that creativity isn't just for the chosen few. It's something that we can all cultivate and nurture, even if it doesn't always lead to fame and fortune. It's about finding joy in the process of creation itself, regardless of the outcome.
And that's a message that's worth spreading.
Mm-hmm.
We all have the potential to be creative, to make our own unique contributions to the world.
So let's go out there and create something amazing. But before you do, we have one more mind-bending concept to unpack from Boden's book.
Oh, I'm all ears. What's next on our creative journey?
We're diving back into the world of artificial intelligence and those programs that can seemingly generate creative outputs.
Those computer artists, composers, and scientists we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Boden explores whether these programs can truly be considered creative or if they're just sophisticated imitators following a complex set of rules.
That's a big question. Can a computer really be original? Can it come up with something truly new, something that hasn't been programmed into it?
That's what we're going to find out in the final part of our deep dive into the creative mind. Stay tuned, because this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, so we're back, and it's time to tackle the elephant in the algorithm. Can computers really be creative?
Right. We've been talking about all these AI programs that can generate art, music, even scientific discoveries.
Yeah, but are they truly creative? Or are they just incredibly complex rule followers?
That's the question, isn't it? It
Yeah.
really forces us to define what creativity means.
Are we talking about just the end product, something new and surprising, or the process of actually getting there?
Yeah, that's a crucial distinction.
I mean, a monkey banging on a typewriter could technically produce like a Shakespearean sonnet given enough time.
Right.
But we wouldn't call that creativity, would we?
Exactly. So Boden argues that we need to look deeper, beyond just the novelty of the output, and actually examine the processes that led to it.
So if a computer spits out a beautiful painting or a catchy melody, it's not enough to just say, wow, that's creative.
Right. We need to understand how it got there.
How it got there. Yeah.
Did the program explore and transform its own conceptual space? Did it experiment, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and come up with new strategies?
Right.
Or was it simply following a set of instructions, even if those instructions were incredibly complex?
This makes me think about those heuristics we discussed earlier.
Mm.
You know, those mental shortcuts that help us navigate
Right.
those conceptual spaces.
Right. Could a truly creative program modify its own heuristics?
Yeah, could it adapt its approach based on the challenges it encounters?
That's a key question. If a program is truly creative, it should be able to step back, evaluate its own work, recognize those dead ends, and course correct.
Just like a human artist or scientist would.
Exactly.
It's like when you're writing a song and you hit a wall. You have to be able to like step back, listen with a critical ear and say, okay, this isn't working. I need to try something different.
Exactly. That kind of metacognitive awareness, the ability to reflect on your own thinking and make adjustments, seems to be a crucial ingredient for creativity.
Yeah,
And it's something that, at least for now, seems to be unique to humans.
right. But who knows what the future holds? Our understanding of the brain and of consciousness itself is constantly evolving.
For sure.
Maybe someday we'll be able to create machines that possess that same level of self-awareness and creative insight.
It's a fascinating possibility, and one that raises all sorts of ethical and philosophical questions. But for now, I think it's safe to say that there's still something special, something magical about the human mind that we haven't yet been able to replicate in artificial systems.
Boden's book really doesn't give us any easy answers, does it? It's more about prompting us to ask better questions, to challenge our assumptions, and to keep an open mind about the ever-evolving nature of creativity.
And that's what makes it such a valuable read. It's not a textbook with all the answers neatly laid out. It's an invitation to explore, to grapple with these complex ideas, and to come to our own conclusions.
So what does this all mean for us, the non-genius listeners out there?
I think Boden's book ultimately challenges us to rethink our entire notion of creativity. It's not about some mystical force that only descends upon the chosen few.
Right.
It's about the interplay of ordinary abilities, learned expertise, persistent motivation, and yes, even a little bit of luck.
It's about recognizing that creativity is a process, not a product. and that's something we can all cultivate and nurture, even if it doesn't always lead to fame and fortune.
And maybe, just maybe, if we stop focusing on the divide between geniuses and everyone else, we can start to see creativity as a fundamental human capacity, something that connects us all.
What if instead of striving to be the next Mozart or Einstein, we simply embrace our own unique creative potential, whatever form it might take?
What if we stop trying to define and categorize creativity and just allow ourselves to be surprised and delighted by its infinite possibilities?
I love that Boden's book has really been a mind-expanding journey for me, and I hope it has been for you, our listeners, as well. It's challenged me to rethink my own creative process and to appreciate the creativity that exists all around me, not just in the extraordinary, but in the everyday moments as well.
I couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the creative mind, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If a computer can generate a novel output, can we really say it experiences the world in the same way we do? What does that tell us about the unique nature of human consciousness and the mystery of creativity that lies at its core?
The question that will likely spark debate for years to come. But that's the beauty of it, isn't it? The journey of exploration and discovery never really ends.
So go out there and create something beautiful, something surprising, something that expresses your own unique vision of the world. And who knows, maybe you'll even stumble upon your own aha moment along the way.
That's all for this episode of the Mad Genius Thesis. Thanks for joining us on this creative journey. Until next time, keep those minds open and those creative sparks flying.